Volunteerism is the lifeblood of many communities. Volunteers are often lauded for their contribution to building a better, stronger society. But that selfless act could cost a Toronto firefighter his job.
Tom Huntz is a City of Toronto firefighter who volunteers in his spare time at the Innisfil Fire Department near Barrie, Ontario. And that's raised the ire of his union, which is threatening to have him fired if he doesn't stop what they call double-hatting.
Joining us from Toronto is Fred LeBlanc, District 13 Vice President of the International Association of Firefighters. And in studio, Jason Reynar. He is the Deputy Chief Administration Officer and Solicitor for the town of Innisfil. Fred, I'll tell you at first blush, this doesn't really look good for the union. I mean, you want to fire a fellow union member because he volunteers during his spare time?
Well, there's two things, Donna, on this. And first of all, thanks for allowing me on the show to explain our side of this matter. The lead-in talked about volunteerism. And from our perspective, this is not volunteering. And that is the misnomer that we have across Ontario. And we're well past the Norman Rockwell images of volunteer firefighters, Mr. Smith running out of the hardware store and putting on his helmet and coat and boots, etc. Volunteer or part-time firefighters, as we prefer to identify them, are organized, they're well paid, they're represented by trade unions, and in fact in Innisfil, Mr. Huntz, as a part-time firefighter there, makes $24 an hour with a minimum 3-hour call-in. So each call, 10 minutes or 3 hours, according to their bylaw, that's $72. You extrapolate that over a year, it's easy for somebody to make about $5,000 or $10,000 annually. And I don't know if that's the proper price tag for quote-unquote volunteering anymore in Ontario, but I have a hard time accepting that as the title volunteer.
I'd have to argue it's a heck of a lot cheaper than if they had a full-time volunteer on staff.
I don't disagree with you on that, Donna, and that's part of the problem from the union side of the coin as well, because we do have full-time firefighters in Innisfil, and we have a hard time with our members who want to go out and undercut other full-time firefighters by doing what should be a full-time service for part-time prices. Now, we do recognize there is a limit for municipalities in which they can afford full-time firefighters, but we don't believe building the fire service based on other municipalities' fire service is the proper way to go about it either.
Let's bring Jason Reynar in here. Jason, the union's saying that Tom Huntz is moonlighting. He's fully qualified to be a firefighter and is paid for by a union, yet he's taking his professional expertise and experience and saying that he's volunteering his time. I can see the point here. I'm a professional at what I do. I don't give my time away. I might volunteer my time for a special event, maybe the Cure for Cancer run, but generally speaking, I don't go out and do what I do for a living for free.
Well, let me put it this way. If the union has its way, Tom can volunteer in a soup kitchen in his community. He can do other volunteer work in the community, but if the fire breaks out, the one thing he knows how to do the best, he has to leave. He's not allowed to participate. And I think it's important to draw the distinction between what the hypothetical municipality that the union likes to talk about and the real Tom Huntz and the real Innisfil. In the real Innisfil, there is no ability to hire full-time firefighters in our small village of Cookstown. It only has over 100 calls a year. It's a few hundred people who live in that area. It doesn't make sense to put full-time firefighters there, but it does make sense to have people who are trained professionals who can volunteer their time. And let's be honest, they have time. I mean, we know firefighters, particularly those in Toronto, they work very long shifts, 24-hour shifts sometimes, but then they have the time off during the day when other people are at work. So from our perspective, from Innisfil's perspective, they're the best kind of volunteer firefighter that we could have.
Fred?
Well, in that, and Jason properly recognized the shift schedule, and it's important to note that shift schedule is there for rehab and recuperation. We work 24-hour shifts. The majority of firefighters work 24-hour shifts across the province, and those days off are there to recoup and rehab, not to go and fully expose yourself again to someone else's fires when it comes into presumptive legislation and cancer issues.
Yeah, but you work 24-hour shifts by choice. And you're not fighting fires the whole 24 hours.
No.
So why then do you need 2 weeks to recover?
Well, it's not 2 weeks. I said 2 days.
Well, Donna, and can I add to this? Because I think this is a fundamental point. And it's not our place to suggest the union can't speak to its members about what's good practice and what's a healthy lifestyle. The issue here is that Tom's going to lose his job because of the dictates of the union. It's one thing for the union to say, look, members, you should take time off in between shifts. It's another thing to say, we're going to control what you can do in your free time.
But
and that's
not
unacceptable.
different than other trade unions when they talk about their own work jurisdiction and doing that same work in another jurisdiction for some undercut or part-time wage. And also, we're talking about a collective agreement. The Constitution was heard. Tom Huntz was represented by legal counsel all the way through. He was found to be a bad member in standing. And as a result of that, now the Toronto firefighters are asking the City of Toronto to uphold their obligation of the collective agreement, where they've agreed and never made any attempts to change the collective agreement for decades, to say a member has to maintain membership in good standing to have continued employment.
Well, Fred, that's a good point. I mean, it does raise the question why the union has decided, after Tom Huntz's 20 years of being both a full-time and a volunteer firefighter, why today they've decided to move ahead with this.
Because
this arbitrary nature, if I could just finish,
just
this
hang on,
arbitrary
though, Jason.
nature is what we have a concern with.
Jason,
this is discriminatory practice.
Can I ask
But
Jason,
to
can I
be
ask a
fair,
question? Jason, I need to ask a question. Suppose Tom had a problem fighting a fire in Toronto, and the problem was linked back to the fact that he was exhausted because he had been volunteer firefighting in Innisfil, and that affected his job and his union position in Toronto. What would you say to that?
I would say that the City of Toronto, in its management duties, would take responsibility for that and have to do what it would have to do, in the same way that if he had been roofing or plumbing
But he wasn't
or building a house...
No, but he wasn't, though. He's fighting a fire, and as you said before, it takes a special skill to be a firefighter, and perhaps this fire went on, and now he's got to go back to his job where he's making a living versus a volunteer position, and he can't perform that job satisfactorily because of his condition. He was supposed to be resting.
That's right, and what you're saying is that those individuals need to take responsibility, and that's why Tom, you know, it's hard enough to talk about hypotheticals, but Tom has said when he's on call the next day, he turns his pager off. So we're not talking about those situations. Well, it's the other 21 days a month that he's available to do this.
Fred, I have to ask, as a taxpayer, it really frustrates me when I see unions claim that these positions they're almost treated as if it's a make-work project, that for some reason the taxpayer is beholden to the union to ensure that people have full-time jobs. If there aren't enough fires, and let's face it, people are building homes that are safer, they're more fire retardant, we take more precautions. If we don't need firefighters, full-time firefighters, why then is the union making this an issue? It's not my job as a taxpayer to ensure that your membership has a full-time job.
But it's your job as a taxpayer to lobby your council to say, I want proper protection. And firefighters do a lot more than just fight fires, Donna.
I don't want them to do a lot more. I don't want them to. That's
medical calls. They do all kinds of specialized rescue.
I don't want to pay a firefighter's pay to go and respond to these issues. If you're there and trained to fight a fire, then fight a fire. We have EMS workers who are paid less to respond to those calls.
Well,
but it's almost as if it's a justification.
I think you should take a look at paramedics' pay right now, Donna, because it's all very equal across the emergency services.
Well, I'll tell you, if I'm in a car accident, I think I'd rather have an EMS worker who can respond to my medical needs. But it seems almost as if we're trying to justify the pay of a firefighter in small communities that can't afford it so we can keep them employed. If there aren't the fires, why do we need full-time firefighters?
Well, I'm not saying that every community needs full-time firefighters, Donna, and that's what you're trying to spin my position into. But Mark raised a good point, and what the area that he didn't go down was the cancer claims and occupational disease that's tied. When we have the two-hatter situation, it arose just within the last 12 months in another community where a member was also a volunteer for a number of years, and we had the member who was suffering from this cancer and two employers fighting each other on who was responsible for the workers' compensation claim. And, you know, the town of Innisfil could find itself in the same situation with Mr. Huntz. Are they going to assist the City of Toronto and help pay for that claim?
But
I mean,
Fred,
that's
to
a big
me, you're
issue
missing
for
the
us.
point.
Jason, 10 seconds.
Fred, you're missing the point. That is an administrative, bureaucratic problem which I think needs to be dealt with.
So
but
is
that
the town
doesn't
of
mean
Innisfil
we
going to
shouldn't
stand up and
have
say
the
we will
good.
pay?
that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the best life-saving that we can provide to our community and to our citizens.
Okay, Fred LeBlanc is with District 13, Vice President of the International Association of Firefighters. Jason Reynar is the Deputy Chief Administration Officer and Solicitor for the town of Innisfil. Thank you both.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Mark.